organisation. We are an organisation set up to support girls and their whānau to launch their lives really effectively. We have 4 main programs: job ready, tertiary ready, life ready and exam ready. And with those we have some online programs, and we also have access to professional coaches that can provide one-on-one coaching for girls. We're fairly new in New Zealand, but really excited about all of the different specialist areas that we offer, and people who can support young women grow up in this quite challenging society at times. So my part with Thrive for Girls is I work with people who are getting ready for entering the workforce, or getting ready for thinking about what they're going to study essentially, and providing some career coaching around that. Another hat I wear is I run my own company called Nimble Career Coaching, and I work with adults who have either lost their way a bit with their career, or are looking to re-enter the workforce after time off, or want to change career, or just be a bit more inspired about what they do really. So my background, I've changed career a few times. I started life as a secondary school teacher. I've also been a professional development leader in a large corporate. I've also worked as a management consultant, and now I'm a career coach. And between being a management consultant and a career coach, I also had 9 years off at home with my children. So coming back into the workforce was a big change for me, but one that I've negotiated reasonably successfully. So that's kind of the basis of my knowledge, I guess. And I've also done a qualification, a graduate certificate in career development from the Nelson Marlborough Institute of Technology. So that's a bit about me, but more importantly, you've come here to hear about 6 tips for entering or re-entering the workforce. And we've got a bit of a balance here of people who are going to be new to the workforce, maybe finishing school, and also adults. So I'm just going to be balancing those 2 groups as we go through. So I'm going to share my screen now and just take you through some slides. So I'll just find that for you. Okay, so there we go. Hopefully that's what you're expecting to be listening to. 6 tips for entering or re-entering the workforce. So this first slide is just thinking about the tip 1 is knowing your values. And in our, there's lots of research that says if you are in a job which suits your values, you're going to be much happier in the long term than something that doesn't suit your values. And we all probably have experienced this if we've been in the workforce an amount of time. For example, you might really love connecting with people and making them their lives better, but you might hate sales. And if you're in a sales role, even though that's a people-focused role, it's not going to make you that happy for too long. You might really value being very powerful and important and having lots of scope to make things happen. But if you are in a back office and doing some business as usual kind of accounting or something with no scope to lead, you might find that really, really frustrating. And so one of the things that it's really important to know when you're re-entering the workforce or starting out is, what are the things that really matter to you? And I've just put some little icons here on the screen that might be things that matter for you. And it might be a combination of these and other things that matter the most. So, you know, the first one there, the artist, being creative, having scope to create things, whatever that might look like. That might be creating new processes. It might be creating part of a film. It might be creating a whole new way of doing something, or some art. The middle one, flexibility. Since COVID, that's become very important for lots of people, and it's great that a lot of organisations are getting on board with that. But sometimes it's hard to ask for that, and sometimes people assume who are looking for work that's not there when it actually is available, and so that's something that it's good to know about. Some people are driven by security and money, and some people don't like to admit that, but in times of rising interest rates, there's something to be said for financial security. So for some people that's a really big thing. Other people, the light bulb there, they like to light up ideas and think about ideas and really get excited by that. Or it might be about caring for others and giving back to the community. So depending on your values, that will depend on what you're drawn to, what you find sustains you, what you find inspiring and interesting. And I guess realistically, not all of our job we will absolutely love, but if we can love a decent chunk of it, we're more likely to be happy with that. And it also helps, knowing your values helps therefore focus your job search and thinking about who or what kind of organisations you'd like to work for. It might be the organisation as a whole that has a mission you're passionate about. Like I have a friend who works for Habitat for Humanity, and that's something that she feels passionate about, their mission. Or it might be that you're part of a larger organisation and you're really happy with your little part of that organisation. So working out how to know your values is really important. And if you think about times in your life when you've been at your happiest and what some of the common threads are going through that, you'll probably get some ideas about what your values are. So the next thing is understanding your strengths and market value. And this is similar to what we've just been discussing, but it's a bit more about the technical skills that you have. So some people are very good at describing, for example, what they have to do in their role, but they're not so good at understanding how they're different from every other, I don't know, say computer programmer. So I worked with a computer programmer a while ago, and he was like, I'm just a computer programmer and I'm not very good at communicating with some people. I'm not very dynamic. I could never be a radio announcer. And I said to him, well, that's okay, because you're not going for jobs around radio announcing. You just need to be a really good programmer. And we talked in quite a lot of detail about what his particular technical skills were, how he'd used them and in which particular context, and how that made him stand out from other computer programmers. And in his case, he was very, very good at writing programs that had no faults in them first time round. And he actually was very good at getting feedback from his clients about how they could be even further improved and enhanced once he'd written them. So that was, he was quite different in that regard from some of the other people he worked with. And so that was his strength. And that meant that was something that we really focused on in his CV. Because if you are going for a job as a computer programmer, guess what? Most other people are also going to be computer programmers. But what's your kind of secret sauce? What differentiates you from others? And how do you find out about that? You find out about that from maybe feedback from colleagues or really close friends, or maybe your partner and family. You find out from that when you think about the kind of, when you've been involved in group work or teams, what your main contribution has been, and if there's some sort of common theme around that. It might be that you've had feedback from teachers if you're at school. If you don't know where to start, there are some tools such as eDisc, Clifton Strengths, and career coaching, which can help you refine how you're different from other people in your profession, or if you haven't got a profession yet, how you might be different from other people who are, say, good at the sciences. What are your secret things that you, or not so secret things, that you really excel at and shine in? It's also useful to think about where people with your skills are located in the economy and what they're being paid. And there are some online surveys that will tell you how to access this. There's one called Hayes, which I think you have to give them your email address, but that gives you an idea of what the range of people might be paid with your particular skills. Because people are people, we're all quite unique. So you might not have all of the skills required to do something you'd like to do in the future, but just looking at that and maybe looking at job descriptions on Seek and Indeed means what you can do is work out a bit where some of your gaps might be and think about what you can do to plug those to make that forward movement into that role you really love more likely. So we need to be realistic about what we'd like to do and where our gaps are. But also it is good to have a bit of a stretch in there. And certainly with most people I work with, they tend to underestimate what they're capable of rather than overestimating it. And I think that's Probably partly a New Zealand thing where we often think of the manuka plant, where it's manuka oil is really powerful and it's really great for your skin and has antibacterial qualities and all that sort of thing. But it's quite a modest little flower, as opposed to say a flamboyant kind of flower that's, I can't think of a name of a flower now, but a really flamboyant flower that's bright and amazing and proud. Is often when we're being thinking about our strengths, we're quite modest, but we need to come back right all the time back to what is it, what examples have we got that demonstrate our skill? Where have we done really good things? Where have others commented? Where have we just felt great about our contribution? And we're likely to be good in those particular areas. If you've been out of the workforce for a while, or perhaps you haven't been actually in the workforce yet, it's good to think about who knows you really well and what information can they give you about your strengths. It may be that you have a teacher who's seen you coach football amazingly and really admires your leadership skills in that area. It may be that you have helped someone with some accounting for a small business and they're really grateful for that and admire you for your accuracy. Use your personal networks to get experiences and get some feedback. If you have been right out of the workforce like I was for a while, looking after children or doing something else, sometimes doing some voluntary work alongside another job can be helpful. That can expose you to some new people and give you a bit of a track record that you can lean on later. You can study too, if that's an option for you, but make sure if you are doing some study that it is a well-regarded course and is likely to lead you to where you're hoping to go, because not all qualifications are equal. And I worked with someone last year who was thinking of doing a PhD because they thought that would make the biggest difference in terms of job opportunities. And after they contacted a few people to talk about what doors that would open, they actually decided that they didn't need to do a PhD at all, which saved them a lot of time and money. So it's good to check in with what you think. Oops, I've gone backwards. Check in with what, check in your assumptions, I guess, with people who are in the labour market. And if you approach people in the right way, it's amazing how generous people are with information. So let's move on to tip 3. Tip 3 is about thinking about how you present your skill set. And while I'm a big fan of going and talking directly to potential employers or providers of tertiary education to get information about who tends to do well in particular jobs and things, it's really important that you have thought through your own offering, if you like, your professional offering, and are able to communicate that really clearly. So I have, I worked with, and sometimes a CV won't even be the most relevant way of doing that. So I worked with somebody who was, had done lots of art with Peter Jackson and his films, and a CV wasn't going to cut it for her. So she did lots of film reels and things and popped them up on LinkedIn and got some interest that way from Canada. So you need to think about what sort of documents are going to be the most appropriate. But I think that actually writing a CV is a very good process for clarifying who you are, which skills you want to bring to the table, and what you want to do in the future. And a CV is a funny document because it's looking at all your past and it's putting it together, but it's kind of also future focused in that you need to really edit what you've got there so it's going to get you to where you want to go. So, you know, I've had conversations with people when they've been talking about their CV, and especially sometimes if they've had a long career and they kind of feel like they have to put everything on these 3 pages so that people will think, wow, this person's done amazing things. Sadly, the more you put on there, the less likely it is to be read. So you really need to edit quite carefully and think about, is this relevant for the role I'm going for or is it not? And so you can leave out stuff and put stuff in. So in terms of the process around that, there's quite a good process to go through in terms of thinking about your best work examples, looking at job descriptions if you've got one, thinking about what are the key parts of the job, what are the key skills, what have you done that relates to that, and then making sure your CV directly addresses the job description if you've got one. So it's really important to never outsource your CV writing completely. If you see an ad for someone who says, I'll write your CV for you, especially if they're not having a proper conversation with you, there's no way they're going to do a good job of that. And it's also going to make it very difficult for you to talk about what you've done in an interview situation because you haven't really written your CV and you might not be as familiar with it as you should be, or the words might not be quite how you speak in the quite careful about doing that. However, getting advice and writing a CV in conjunction with someone alongside you can be really helpful because they provide a fresh pair of eyes. They've seen maybe lots of CVs and they can provide you some very detailed feedback. Most people I work with hate writing CVs. And most CVs I see are pretty awful. Now, I guess, people who come to me are likely to not feel that confident about their CVs, but a lot of CVs are very dry. They're not very interesting to read. They're not very jam-packed full of examples of achievements. They're mainly describing functionally what someone has done. So, I'm a teacher. I teach years 9 to 13. I have 150 students. I teach history, that kind of thing, rather than I inspire young people to do more than they ever thought possible. I'm very good at working as a team and providing critiques for history exams and improving the process of writing reports. They're quite a different flavour there. And the second one is more about you as a person, how you work, as well as the technical stuff. The first one, really, if you're going for a history job, everyone's CV might have those particular things in them. So don't outsource your CV writing, get feedback on that. Make your CV current and interesting. Obviously, the more recent stuff is going to be more important generally. So the worst example I had of this was someone who had on their CV that they were Ducks of Tawa College in 1979. So two things about that. A, it's a very long time ago. B, it's like, what have you done since then? And C, it's just not very relevant to that particular role they were going for. So, if you're just starting out, it might be relevant that you do babysitting and you're involved, you've been leading a guides group or you've been doing things like that because they show leadership and community engagement. But by the time you get to your 40s and 50s, you really should be concentrating on what you've done in the last sort of 10 years mainly of your life. Before that, you can either list things just in a bullet point form, or you can talk about them a bit in the interview, but not really have them on your CV, because CVs get very long and they get very clouded in terms of what your core focus is. Please use current language, a modern format, and an active voice. And what I mean by active voice is that that you demonstrate something rather than you have demonstrated. So you're talking in the current context rather than the past. It just means that your CV feels a bit more lively. And if you can make your CV feel more vital and easier to read, that's great. So I know someone who gets lots of CVs and he will sometimes read CVs late at night. And seriously, he's really tired, and unless the person is succinct and their CV is focused, he just won't read it. And that's a real pity, because I know that people have probably spent a lot of time on that, but unless the key things are on that front page, you won't get the traction. People won't look at it, and you'll go into the probably not pile, or just the let's not bother looking at those anymore pile, and that's not what we want. So it's useful to identify your 4 to 5 key selling points and focus on them in a CV. If that's too many, 3 is fine. If you're getting down to 2 or 1, then I think you need to have another look at yourself, because I'm sure you've got more things than that to offer. But really, you're thinking about, what are my key things here? How can I make the biggest difference to your organisation or to your team? What is how do I stand out from other people who might have a similar background from me? Sometimes you can combine things. I worked with a lawyer a few years ago, and he was passionate about the performing arts. But he'd done conveyancing and family law for a long time. And he's like, I just want to do something more arty, but I'm not quite sure how I can make a living out of it. And we thought about that, and we were like, well, maybe you could offer your services at a discounted rate to people working in the arts. And that way you could be a bit more involved in the arts, but still use your really established legal skills in that area. And that's what he did. He established some special legal services for people in the arts sector, which he just loved. And that was his point of difference. And people respected him for that. Always use examples of what you've done and what you've achieved. So thinking about if you just say, I'm an amazing leader of community work, it doesn't tell me a lot about who you've led, what you've achieved, what the benefit was to the community. So if you can weave those things in there, that's super helpful. Always use practical examples wherever you can. It brings things to life, and it also means that whoever's interviewing you will actually be able to ask you some interesting questions about what you've done. Because if you have a very bland CV, that tends to mean your interview will be very bland as well, and you won't have a chance to shine. And it's that wonderful positive shining, it sounds a bit vague, but in an interview that really makes you stand out, where you can talk positively about what you've done and people can ask you more questions about that. That's what makes you memorable and makes you stand out. Your CV also really needs to be tailored tightly for the role and the culture of the organisation you're applying for. And both of those things are important. So the role is often about what you're expected to do functionally. The culture is more about how do we work around here? Are people casual? Are they really formal? What's the fit going to be like? And that's really important. So I had an experience a few years ago now where I had clients coming to see me back to back, and one of them was in the film industry and one of them was a lawyer. And the film industry person came in first, and she was a real character, and she had these amazing orange thigh-high furry boots on, and she was very creative and animated with her hands and everything, and we were talking about what she was going to do. And then after that, I dealt with another young woman who was a lawyer who wanted to leave law actually, but she was extremely precise in her language, and she sat very straight and properly, and she had a pinstriped suit on, and I was just amazed by the very different ways they presented themselves. The legal person was extremely precise in her use of language. She was very focused. She didn't wander off on tangents or any of that kind of thing. These may well be, stereotypes, and not all lawyers are like that, and not all creative people are like that. But I did think at the time it's really important that people find a job that really suits them. And so that's where it is important that your CV, and also when you're interviewing, you are authentically yourself, because you're not going to be happy if you end up in an environment that is totally wrong for you. And you can't always tell what the environment's going to be like by the job title. It's very much about the kind of people they attract. And even sometimes teams within an organisation can be very dynamic, say when an organisation itself might not be quite so dynamic. So finding out information about an organisation is also really useful. And you can often do that by either finding out who you know who might be working in there, or looking at LinkedIn too, because LinkedIn often is a rich source of connection, being able to connect with people and ask them questions. And I spend quite a lot of time with people I'm working with talking about how to do that in a way that feels comfortable and not too strange, because most of us generally don't go up to strangers and ask them questions. But if you approach people in the right way, often people are really happy to be helpful. Okay, let's move on. Tip 4 is connecting with opportunities. And there are different ways you can connect with opportunities. I guess the thing that I think is useful around this, in terms of an overarching thing, is to think about the fact that opportunities are people. That most opportunities, behind an opportunity is a person, who's got a pain point or a problem that they're wanting to fix. Maybe they're short-staffed. Lots of people are like that at the moment. Maybe there's a particular technical skill that their team hasn't got, or maybe it's the team's not working that well together. So remember, it's all about people, but those people who you're connecting with are often a bit time poor. So you do need to be aware of their time and help them understand what you're offering fairly quickly. And that comes back to both the CV and also thinking about how you talk about yourself and that sort of thing as well. So how do you connect with opportunities? I guess there are three main ways I'm going to talk briefly about today. But before I do that, the key thing is that connecting with opportunities is really about taking action. So I've worked with a lot of people who, and depending on their personalities, they approach this sort of thing quite differently. So some people I know are great at making plans, but very poor at actually doing anything. And those people need to remember that actually thinking about connecting with opportunities is quite different from actually doing the doing. So you need to make sure you do that. I also work with other people, and I'm just going to talk about two different personality types here, who are very good at doing the doing, but they don't think first. And that's not great either, because it's kind of sort of like I call it a say and spray kind of thing, where they just are talking to lots of people or sending CVs out everywhere, and they're not actually thinking about, is this a good opportunity for me right now? What do I know about that organisation? Is this a good fit, or do I just want a job? So I'm just going to write something down and send it off and feel like I've done something. So make sure that you have actually done some reflecting and thinking first before you get into the connecting with opportunities. The three main things I want to talk about here are job advertisements, connecting with recruiters, and uncovering your own opportunities. And all of those three have pluses and minuses. So job ads, usually that means there is a job there, although sometimes companies advertise just to see who else is out there when they might have an internal person, or they might even just be ghosting and putting an ad up just to see who's out there, to see if there's anyone that they might add to the organisation somewhere else. And in some places like the public sector, they have to advertise jobs. So there may not even actually be a job there. That's the downside. The plus side is that usually someone's done some thinking quite carefully about the kind of skills they need, the kind of person they want, the background that person should have. And that's really useful information for you when you're thinking about getting back into the workforce or thinking about where you might fit. Even if you're not actually going to apply for the job, it's useful to look at Seek and Indeed and analyse the kinds of jobs that are there, the sort of skills that are there, and whether the wording of some of those might help you package up your own skills. And also, if there are particular recruitment agencies who are advertising regularly in areas that you're interested in, then they might be a place that you might go into, or someone you might go and talk to later. So job ads are great because there's often a job there. They're clearly defined usually, and there's a process. There's often someone you can talk to initially about the job, and then you usually create your CV or tailor your CV more and create a covering letter and send it off, either electronically, usually electronically now, and then you hear back, hopefully. Sometimes they don't get back to you. The job ads you end up in someone's intro and they don't get back to you, but usually they should, especially at the moment. There's not really an excuse for that. So the job ads, you're not having to front up until they have seen your CV. So your CV, if you like, is the vanguard of you. It goes ahead of you and it creates excitement or interest for the person reading it or not. So job ads definitely are great, and they they say they make up about 15% of jobs. Now that varies a bit depending on what's happening in the economy, but a lot of jobs aren't necessarily advertised in New Zealand. Recruiters are like an intermediary between the organisation and the labour market, or the people trying to get work. And some recruiters are fantastic and some are not so useful for people. So what can you do to make yourself more likely to connect with a recruiter? Again, you need to have clarified what you want. You need to clarify your key skills, what you're looking for. Even things like a large organisation, a small organisation, an organisation or something to do with housing, just have a bit of a think about that. If you can go along to a recruiter and treat it a bit like a job interview, they are much more likely to find space for you. They will understand what you're looking for. They will be thinking about organisations that they have relationships with where you might fit, and they may well talk to other organisations about you and find you a role that way. The downside of working with recruiters is that sometimes they don't understand maybe the breadth of what you've done in the past. Sometimes they're not very good if you've done lots of different things at seeing where you might fit. So you really need to, if you're going to a recruiter, think really carefully about where you want to position yourself and what are the key things you want them to know about you before you go and see them. Please don't go to a recruiter and just say, I want a job, because they're the kind of people that recruiters find really hard to place, and they get frustrated and then you're not served well by them. Remember, with recruiters, it is the organisation who pays them. So they are looking after the organisation's interests, not yours. And sometimes people get really upset if recruiters don't get back to them, or they've talked to the recruiter for a while and the recruiter they don't feel the recruiter understands them. The onus is on you to make sure that the recruiter understands you, that you speak a bit of the recruiter's language, and they can see easily where you might fit in organisations. So a recruiter, it's almost like you need to prepare well to go and see a recruiter so that you can shine. Some people say that recruiters only put square pegs in square holes. In other words, if you are not a trained auditor, say that you won't be put in an audit role. Something like an auditor, that's probably the case because it's quite technical. But actually, a good recruiter will look at the bigger picture too. And if they really like you, then they may actually look at you for another role. So when I got my management consulting role, I hadn't done any management consulting at all. And the organisation I was employed by in the end told the recruiter that they wanted a man who was 55 who had extensive management experience. Now, I wasn't a man 10 years ago. I'd had no public sector experience, and I was kind of like the mystery house on location. So it does happen if you prepare well that a recruiter may see something in you, but you really need to have worked out what it is you want as much as you can before you go and see a recruiter. So a recruiter can streamline the process, but you do need to do your homework before you go and see them. And sometimes they are more interested in people with more experience than people straight out of school. But you need to work out which type of recruiter is going to be best for your situation. So you need to just wind back a bit and do some good pre-thinking before you go and see a recruiter. In terms of uncovering your own opportunities, this is something I'm a really big fan of, especially at the moment when there's a shortage in the labour market. Because often when you have conversations with people, especially if you've done your homework, and I keep coming back to that, you can challenge their assumptions about what you are like. So I remember when I got my first career coaching role, where I was working with people who've been made redundant mostly, I had an interview, and the person said to me when they were setting up the interview, look, you've been at home for 9 years. I'm not sure how engaged you are with the community or with life, just wondering how you've kept up to date with things. Be ready to talk to us about your knowledge of the economy, of current events, and demonstrate to us that your brain still works. They didn't quite put it like that, but that's what they were saying. And I thought, oh no, this is going to be a bit awful. I'm not looking forward to this conversation. But when I started speaking with them, they obviously decided that I didn't have two heads and I was actually relatively intelligent and I would be okay at working with them. But yeah, that was quite ominous. And so it is important, if you are going out and uncovering opportunities for yourself, that you think about, what have I done to show I'm still connected, to show I've got some skills, to demonstrate some value. And if you really feel like you can't, then maybe you could look for some voluntary work that would help you get more connected into your community, develop some skills, and also just give you a recent referee who can talk about your skills, how good you are with figures or people or developing ideas or being creative or whatever it is you want to do. So for me, when I was out of work, the paid workforce for 9 years, and I was quite busy doing other things, but one of the things I did was I did some work for Red Cross mentoring refugees, former refugees. So that involved getting alongside people, helping them look for work, doing the sort of things I'm doing now really. And I was able to talk a bit about that when people ask me questions. So never underestimate some of those voluntary roles, especially if they have a flavour of what you want to head towards if you have been out of the workforce for a little while. So I guess the benefits and the upsides and the downsides of uncovering your own opportunities. The benefits are that you get to go and talk directly to people who are hiring. And I don't usually say talk to HR and organisations, talk to people who are actually doing the doing, because HR departments sometimes keep people out rather than welcome them in. But it enables you to have conversations about how people might perceive your skills, where the gaps might be, what you could do to plug them, and also who else you could talk to. And sometimes people are incredibly generous with their contacts and their connections and giving you information that you'd never find out otherwise. And so I'm a really big fan of doing that. My best example of that was many years ago, actually, when a friend of mine who was working at Telecom said I had to ring this person and he would be able to give me lots of information. I was a bit reluctant to do that, I'll be honest, but I did ring this man, and it ended up found out he was doing HR consulting in Dubai, which I just thought was just ridiculous. I thought, I'm not going to ring him, wrong time frame, wrong time zone, everything. But I did ring him, and he spoke to me for an hour, telling me about all the different people I could contact, what their preferences were in terms of types of staff they were looking for, what opportunities he knew about. And as a result of that, I had 3 or 4 job offers within 2 weeks. So yeah, I was really pleased I did that. It didn't come naturally, but I think being brave really helps in these situations when you're uncovering your own opportunities. But it's about having a bit of a process, thinking about how to go about it, thinking about keeping on track, keeping doing things. It does take a bit of courage. I know I had someone I worked with last year who went through a process with me and then said to me, oh, look, I think you're great at what you do, but I'm just not feeling very courageous. I've been offered a job, I'm going to take it. That's totally fine. It was a good outcome. She's happy where she is. But it does take a little bit of courage. And so it is important that when you are connecting with opportunities, you are pacing yourself, you're directing your energy into places that are likely to get you good results, and you're also looking after yourself, so you're having plenty of time to I don't know, walk the dog, go to the beach, read a good book, all those sorts of things as well, so it doesn't just grind you down. The other thing, just before I move on, the other thing that uncovering your opportunities is good for is sometimes people who are older, but are very dynamic and flexible and amazing still. If they feel as if they have been looked over from the other processes around recruiters and job ads, sometimes connecting directly with employers can really work really well for them. So the oldest person that I've worked with to find work has been 69, and she was an amazing woman, and she got a job very quickly. That was probably more to do with her than me, but she was not, she was prepared to be very flexible, she was very dynamic, she was very interested and curious, and certainly the person who employed her was really delighted to do that. Okay, next tip 5. Impressing at the interview. Now, I think when people say to me, I want to get better at being interviewed, often I actually wind back a bit and say, well, let's have a look at your CV and let's think about what are the key things that you're going to put out there in terms of your things that really make you stand out from everyone else. And so the interview, if you've done that preparation for your CV and pre-thinking, the interview is actually relatively straightforward. If you haven't, you just need to wind back a bit and do some of that. So there are basic things that everybody knows around this stuff. Being a bit early, checking traffic, parking, bus routes, and dressing appropriately. What that looks like will depend entirely on where you're being interviewed. Are you being interviewed on the factory floor? Are you being interviewed for a job in a big corporate? Even, since COVID especially, I think work standards, if you want to call them that, have changed a bit. People are dressing more smart business casual in most roles, and maybe having a tie for some particular meetings. But a lot of us, the dress code has relaxed, but how much it's relaxed will vary from place to place. And there are still things that people do that are just crazy. So I'm thinking, this was a while ago now, but I interviewed someone who was wearing a see-through white shirt with a black bra, very lacy bra underneath. And it was very distracting and just really just changed the whole tone of the interview, really. Just thought that they hadn't judged that well at all, and because this role that I was interviewing them for involved a lot of judgment, that made me sort of cloud my thinking and maybe just think, yeah, maybe not. Okay, now they might have been really good at the role, but it's just really important to dress appropriately. Identify your key strengths, should have done that already, have some really good examples, and bring some questions, write some questions down and bring them along with you. There's no problem with doing that, and we all get a bit nervous and it's easy to forget things when we're nervous. Make sure you're polite to everyone you meet. I've had awful situations where people have been horrible to my support staff, and that's just not on, because I really value what they do. And quite often people interviewing will ask the receptionist how the person greeted them, whether, so even if you're nervous, don't be a dick, basically. Be polite, be thoughtful, be friendly, and remember that everyone's a human being and deserves our respect. Of course, you need to turn off your phone, and before you leave the interview, you need to thank them for their time. And you might like to say, could you tell me what the next steps are? Because I'm keen for this opportunity, something like that. So everyone knows those things, but still people don't do them sometimes. The worst interview I think I've ever been involved in was when someone was really late for their interview and they sat down. What they said was fine, but their shirt gradually became wet because they had run up a hill, I do live in Wellington, to talk to me, and they were sweating like crazy, and it was just revolting. Needless to say, they didn't get the job. They may have been a much better fit than I gave them credit for, but I wasn't prepared to take them any further just because of that lack of judgment. So there are some things that you can control. People who interview really well aim for a conversational style. So I think sometimes people get really stressed out if they think it's a performance and they have to be perfect and they have to be kind of like themselves on an A++ day and everything has to go well. Unfortunately, if you go in with that mindset, often you get really nervous, the interviewer picks up on it, and they don't get the best out of you, and you get really stressed and things go wrong. Sometimes you might talk really quickly. It doesn't work for people. So just try and go in there. If you've done your good preparation, now's the time to relax and just be you. I think it was Grant Elliott, the ex-New Zealand cricketer, who said, I prepare really hard for my games and then I go out and play like I don't care. I think some elements of that are probably helpful to think like that if you've done your preparation thoroughly beforehand. Being yourself on the day is really important because of what we said earlier around culture. So you want to be yourself, because if you're not yourself and they really like what they see in the interview, but when you get into the job, it's quite different from how you interviewed, that's not going to work very well for anybody. So, if you're quite outrageous, well, then maybe you might want to tone it down a little bit perhaps, but if you're yourself, then you'll either be welcomed into a slightly outrageous team and you'll all get on well and have lots of fun and be really productive, or you might be welcomed into a team that really finds you way out there and and it just doesn't work as a medium-term kind of working relationship thing. So the being yourself thing, I think, is actually really important. Strong interviewees use breathing techniques to calm themselves down, because it is human to be a bit nervous. Let's not pretend that people aren't going to be nervous at all. And they go in with a curious, positive mindset, smiling, connecting with people, asking good questions, and just, again, coming back to seeing as a conversation, thinking about, what do I want the person interviewing me to know about me at the end of this? And what would I like to know about them or the role or the organisation? And that's really the essence of what a good interview is. So a really good interviewer should try and put you at ease. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes they put you at ease in slightly strange ways, like the old classic, tell me about yourself. Some interviews start like that, and it's not always the easiest thing for an interviewer to answer, someone being interviewed. And often you just would talk about what you really, how you like to work, what you really love to do, something you've done recently at work, just so you're doing a highlights reel really of your CV. If you've got questions about what they're doing strategically, this is a good time to ask it in an interview. You don't want to make the questions too kind of negative, but there are ways that you can ask questions that get the answers you want without being sort of needling them and being horrible or being very sort of poking your fingers in places they might not want to be poked. So one of my favorites, if you're thinking about the culture of a place, is just to ask, what do people really love about working here? And from that question, you can find out a huge amount, actually, because if they kind of struggle and say, oh, well, we have a fruit bowl, or we have drinks on Fridays, if that's all they can come up with, that tells you quite a lot about the culture. But if they actually can give you a list of 3 or 4 different things, that will give you an idea of what it's really like as a place to work. The final thing around strong interviewees is, if you do have a gap in your CV, and there could be a huge number of reasons for that. It might be that you have had a sick parent or relative you've been looking after, you might have brought up children, you might have been travelling, you might have had a really terrible time with cancer yourself and had to take some time off work. I would just talk about that, be prepared to talk about that, put something on your CV about that. People since COVID are much happier to, much more generous around thinking about that and seeing people as human beings. In the past, people sort of looked down on people sometimes who took career gaps, but now we kind of acknowledge that there are times in life where actually your career might not be the most important thing, and that doesn't mean that it won't become a more important thing later on. So it's good to find some words to talk about that, and depending on your circumstances that might look quite different, but I know for myself, I've been made redundant twice and I have got some gaps in my career pathway. It's not been a nice smooth line, and I've just been able to talk to people about that, and mostly they've been pretty understanding. And particularly I think since COVID, with more people being made redundant, some people who used to judge others very harshly have actually decided that maybe that wasn't the best way of looking at some of these things. Okay, tip 6, this is our last one. So presuming you've got the role, making a strong start is also really important, because you are building up your brand, your career collateral, your career, you're branching out, and you've done your best to be diligent about finding out whether this is a good opportunity, but it may or may not be when you get there. I can think of a role that I've had where the role looked fantastic on paper, but the person I was reporting to was a very awful bully, and what I thought I was getting into and what the reality was were 2 quite different things. So, how do you make a strong start in your role? It's good to understand what the key priorities are for your role. And that may or may not be obvious in the job description that or the job, if you've applied for an actual job that's been advertised. It might be something you actually ask in the interview. What am I going to be my main priorities? Or how will you know I've been a success in this role? So understand what your focus needs to be. See if you can work out who are the key people, what are the key policies, and what are the main processes you need to be able to get a handle on, and focus on trying to get up to speed with that first. The other things can clip on later, but if you can work out what are the key things you need to do first, that's going to be super helpful. Ask judicious questions, and by that I just mean try not to ask questions constantly about the smallest little thing, but if you can work out who are good people to ask questions, maybe cluster your questions up every now and then, or say to someone, look, I've got a problem with working out how to do this on the computer. Can you just help me work out how to do that? And you'll just quickly that way build up a reservoir of knowledge and that you can dip in and out of and clip extra bits of stuff onto as you go, which will help you settle into the role first and well. You also need to just look after yourself when you're starting a new job, because it's really tiring learning everyone's names and all the new processes and everything. So be kind to yourself, and as you get used to this sort of stuff, know how your performance will be measured. I worked with someone who had worked on lots of Peter Jackson's film sets, and he was quite stressed moving from his role into working in a role doing sort of crafting old-fashioned doors for old houses. And because he didn't understand quite how they were going to measure how good he was at what he was doing. Once he asked them that, they told him, and he was like, oh, that's okay then. And it just took a weight off his mind. So if you have things that you're worrying about, see if you can put some words around them and just craft them into a question, and that will help clarify how you're going to be measured and maybe put your mind at rest. The other point there is make sure that you put on honest days of work, and that you honour how you presented yourself. So if you say you are a dynamic person who gets things done, if you turn up on the job and they start paying you and you end up being really lazy, that's just not good for anybody, and it certainly won't be good when you come to leave and get a reference to go elsewhere. New Zealand is a very small place. People talk, people find out what you like, and it may be actually that you may well know someone, or someone might know someone who works with you, and it's going to make it just that much harder to get a job. So even if it's not a great fit for you, even if you're thinking, I'm not sure about this role, do your best and then see if you can modify the way you look at it or some of the tasks so that it becomes better for you, and do the best you can. And then if you decide you want to leave after that, then you can with your head held high. You've done your best, and there's no kind of there's no shame in bumping into someone on the street, or you haven't got a dark past that you're trying to hide or get away from. It's always good to be open and honest and do your best. Sounds like something my mother said to me, but it is actually still true. If the role's not working, see if you can work out why. Can you adjust your mindset? Can you see it differently? Can you see it as a stepping stone to something else? You're collecting some new skills. It might be hard and not very fun at this stage, but having that will just enable you to put a different jigsaw puzzle together in terms of being able to say what you've done and why, and launch you into your next role. Maybe there's some upskilling you could do. Maybe there's a night class you could do. Maybe there's someone who could mentor you for a particular thing. I know a friend of mine who went into a role and who wasn't very good at running team meetings, asked someone to coach her around that, someone within the organisation, and she basically got a lot of ideas about how to improve her team meetings, and after 4 or 5 coaching sessions it became a real strength of hers. So it may well be that somebody can get alongside you and work with you and share their expertise, and you can learn off them. So just try and do things to improve your experience while you're there, upskill yourself, do everything you can in terms of what you can control, and then let the rest go. Okay. So key takeaways from this. Basically, it's really important for you to understand your values and strengths first before you go and try and get a new role or get your first role. Explore the labour market. That sounds very fancy. That just really means talking to people in areas of interest to you. Identify the target organisations or types of roles and gather as much information as you can from there, and then create your CV from there. Know how to communicate your points of difference, with whom and when, and different people in different types of organisations who work in this area will like different ways of different approaches. Effective job hunting is always an active process. It can feel like you do a lot when actually you might just be thinking about doing a lot. So make sure you're actually doing the doing. Looking after yourself is really important too. I know when I worked exclusively with people who were made redundant, when they were really tired and run down, it was very hard for them to have the courage and the energy to connect with employers or present well at interviews. So that self-care stuff's really important. And career coaches are trained to design you a personal program to get you to where you want to go faster and easier. And they also provide confidential advice. So most of us try to be really invisible to the people out there who might be employing you, but really visible to you and walking alongside you. So that's really important. So look, we've come to the end of the session. I've done an awful lot of talking tonight, so sorry about that. Usually it's me asking questions and people I work with talking. But I have two offers for you. If you would like to work for me, as I said earlier, I do work for Thrive for Girls, and I also have my own business called Nimble Career Coaching. And if you're a student and you'd like to get some more clarity around your personal strengths and career direction, or help with writing your CV, if you'd like to email me at christine@thriveforgirls.com, I will be in touch to set up a time to meet with you. The cost of those two sessions is $150, so that's $75 per session. Normally that would be about $200. If you're an adult and you would like some coaching sessions also around any of what we've discussed today, depending on where you're at, you might want quite different things. I'm really happy to offer you 3 coaching sessions for $300. Normally that would be $450, with a focus on overcoming which particular areas you're struggling with at the moment, and they might be very different depending on your journey here so far. If you want to take up either of those offers, you need to email me at the address that's on the screen. And please note that to take up these offers, you will need to contact me and set up some time before the end of February 2023.